Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Bob Huff Leadership Forum. So, first off, we just wanted to say hello to Mr. Huff. And would you like to introduce yourself?
My name is Bob Huff. I'm a former state senator, former state assembly member, former Diamond Bar City Council member. Still a decent person, I think. But just by way of background, I grew up in the Imperial Valley, very southern part of the state, agricultural country. My grandfather homesteaded down there in 1906, so I was out working in the fields as soon as I was old enough to hold a hoe. And that's not a hoe as you think of it. That's a short handled implement back then with a metal blade that you took out weeds with. But I made that comment at a college commencement service one time and everybody was aghast. But anyway, so I lived in a small community where everybody was basically looking after each other, and everybody went to the same school. We didn't have the racial tensions that they did in the 60s in the city areas because, we knew everybody already and it wasn't really strange or foreign. But went to Imperial Valley College my first year, Santa Barbara City College my second year, graduated from Westmont College, a small private liberal arts Christian college in Santa Barbara, after 4 years, working full time the first 2 years and part time the last 2 years. Graduating in 4 years, that's a challenge very few people can meet these days, just because it's hard to get all the courses to articulate. But nevertheless, lived in Imperial Valley for about 8 years after that, working in a grain facility. Then I moved to Diamond Bar in 1983 and bought a small company and worked that up until I got involved in elected life. And what drew me into politics was I attended a church in Diamond Bar and was on the board there and was asked to be chairman of the building program. Well, we had a conditional use permit that was about to expire. It had been issued by the county. Diamond Bar incorporated in 1989, and this was less than a year later. And we had this thing that was going to expire, but our building program hadn't stopped. So I went to the planning department, and I didn't even know what a conditional use permit was, but it turns out it is a permit to do things based on certain conditions, as it sounds like. And in the course of things, they had a lot of new obligations they wanted to put on the church. And if we'd done everything they wanted, we couldn't have built the church. So, I basically told them that. And planning officer says, well, Mr. Huff, if you're not willing to let us take our conditions, we're not willing to let you build your church. And so they denied it, and I appealed it to the city council, and we prevailed there. But that pulled me into the political process, where I discovered that not everybody that was on city council or appointed by city council members was your friend, when I thought everybody was just here to get along. And pulling me into the political process, I got involved was asked to serve on the General Plan Advisory Committee. General Plan is a document that is sort of a template of the future of what a city would look like in the next 20 years or so. You're supposed to keep it revitalized and fresh, so it always is a roadmap to what you're going to do in the future. But it served a couple of years as mayor. Actually ran against Bob Pacheco, one of your former speakers, for a state assembly in 1998, lost, got in at the last minute, like 3 months before the election. I didn't have a clue what I was doing, but I learned a lot during that process. And then when he termed out 6 years later, got elected to the state assembly, and then moved over to the state senate 4 years after that. And it took about 2 years in the assembly to sort of get the lay of the land and understand how things actually worked. And I found that when you want to get things done, you just can't be an ideologue and say no to everything. You got to figure out how to engage and find that sweet spot that you can agree on and work to build on that. And this learning curve led me to be in leadership in both the assembly, where I served as caucus chair, the number 2 position for the Republican side. And then in the Senate, I also got to that position after the first year and then became Senate leader 4 years later. So it was an interesting run, termed out in 2016, and formed Huff Strategies, which is what I do with my wife. My wife was born in Taipei. Mei Mei is her name. She's considered a leader in the Chinese community. She's not considered a leader. She is a leader in the Chinese community. So we do political, business consulting, and government relations. So that's it in a nutshell. Happy to answer any questions you have.
Thank you so much, Mr. Huff, for introducing your roots. And we'll move on to our first topic, which is the legislation topic, led by myself, Ryan Melky. So, Mr. Huff, you had many roles, including state senator, Diamond Bar City Council, and California State Assembly. You had to sign some bills, including a few that stood out to me, which is the personal income tax law, gross income exclusion, Olympic and Paralympic Games, Valley Fever, and Affordable House Bonding Act. And so, what I'd like to ask you is, would you like to explain how these bills are important to you and why you signed them and endorsed them?
Well, now, if you ask me about district of choice, I could tell you about that. That's something that you enjoy at Walnut High School. You know, I authored and co-authored a bazillion bills, and so I don't remember all of them. Valley Fever was certainly something that's important it was in Imperial Valley, and I always thought it was named after us, but it turns out it was named after Central Valley, I think. But spores can be dormant in the soil for a century longer. I mean, I was reading an article when that bill was being considered, and they were digging around old Chinatown area in LA, and some people caught valley fever there from spores that have been dormant for 100 years or so. But you know, those kind of things are just kind of common sense and get bipartisan support. What were the other several that you mentioned?
I mentioned also is it, uh, oh, the Affordable Housing Bond Act and the Income Tax Law.
Affordable bond housing. I mean, as you have seen, housing prices have just been climbing crazily in the last year. As people have been working out of their home, they find they don't have enough space. Interest rates are low, so they're trying to buy more houses. This isn't a problem just of the last year. It's been going back for a long time. We don't build enough housing supply for what the demand is. So the Housing Bond Act was something to help people, as I recall it, basically have more resources to buy housing. Getting the down payment is a big deal for many people. If they're credit worthy, then certainly we should help them do that. When you own your own home, you tend to take better care of it. You're more invested in the community, and there's a lot of positive things to go with it. It also tends to be a generational wealth transfer mechanism. The tax, I can't even remember what that was, but I was generally against higher taxes for reasonable taxes and restructuring so that they're not burdensome.
Thank you so much. And we have the second topic by Connor Fox.
Yeah, sure. Thank you, Mr. Huff, for answering those questions. And this topic is about your motivation to become a public servant.
Mhm.
So you have a really inspirational career in public service filled with notable accomplishments like those that you listed with your leadership in both the California Assembly and the California Senate. So something I wanted to know is uh, when you began your career in public service and when you were helping the church out, how did you envision your future career? And did everything go as expected, or uh, did you have to adapt along the way?
I never saw it as a career. I've been running my own business for a couple of decades, and I did find that when I got involved in city council, it crowded out the job that I did during the daytime that put food on the table. So from that standpoint, when you're in public service, it takes all the time that you're willing to give it. And I've always been one that wants to give back to the community, and I like to fix problems. And man, when you're in public life, that's everywhere. So getting elected to the state assembly and senate, which actually pays something, helped take that tension away from putting food on the table. But again, I never really saw it as a career. And indeed, when I got out of public service, I did something similar. I'm not doing wholesale food products anymore, but doing things that I learned over the 21 years in government life, primarily government relations and helping people navigate the intricacies of the government. So it's been an interesting run. But did that answer your question?
Yes, it did.
Okay.
And may I also ask, what was your favorite part of serving in the California Assembly and the California State Senate?
Again, solving problems. Let me tell you about one problem that was presented to me. It was first or second year in the assembly. And my wife, who, as I said, was born in Taiwan, so she's fluent in Mandarin, Cantonese, as well as English. But she was my unpaid liaison to the Chinese community. And as you know, in Walnut, Diamond Bar, Roland Heights, we have a large number. There's a growing number in Chino Hills and Brea and around. But in my Senate district, I had the highest number of API members of any of the 40 state Senate districts. But regardless, May got a call from one of her friends saying that her after school program had been shut down by the state. And I was kind of curious, why that would be. So we talked to her in a little more detail. And then we found out there was a couple other our friends that similarly had these programs that had been shut down by the state. So I pulled together a community meeting of as many after school programs we could find. At that time, they were overseen by Department of Social Services, I believe. In effect, they viewed them as daycare. So they were putting onerous requirements that had to be so many square feet of space for a child to wiggle around in. They had to take breaks for recess. They had all these do's and don'ts that didn't really apply to a at-will after-school program. It's not mandatory. They don't have to be there. And in fact, that's something I would tell the state guys. I say, listen, these parents are sacrificing. They're in effect taxing themselves so their kids can have a better education. And when that kid goes into the classroom, he helps bring up the rest of the class as well, because the teacher didn't have to worry quite as much about that one. So anyway, the first meeting, we asked for a show of hands of all those that had programs like we were talking about. Nobody raised their hand. They're afraid they're going to get on the radar of the state and they would get shut down. So once the state said they wouldn't shut them down if they raised their hands, we had an honest discussion about the issue. That helped the state understand better about what was happening. But it still took me 5 years to find a solution to this. And it wasn't until I was in the Senate. And we basically changed it to be monitored by the education law instead of social services. And in so doing, we treated it like private school. If you're in a private school, you just sign an affidavit that you're doing this, 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 and this, and then you're off the hook. You don't get looked. The government just makes sure you're set up right, and then they leave you alone. So we set that up for the after-school programs, and it wasn't earth-shattering, and it was nothing that a lot of people knew about. But I felt good that I had an issue that was brought to me by a community member that they couldn't solve on their own. And again, it took me a long time, but we got it dealt with. And as you know, these after school programs are flourishing everywhere. And it's not just the Asians that are using them. Primarily all ethnic groups use them as a language school, but they also keep some of their cultural heritage alive as well. So solving problems is what I enjoyed the most. That's just a good illustration of it.
Thank you. We really appreciate hearing about your experiences and as a public servant. And I have just one more question for this topic. My final question is, you said that in the first 2 years of the California Assembly, you sort of got to know everyone, sort of got to know how it worked out there. Could you tell us a little bit more about that and if it was any different in the Senate?
Yeah, so the Assembly and the Senate are very similar, except there's some differences in how they're run. The Assembly, there's twice as many people. And so in many respects, in the Senate, there's half as many. You got 80 Assembly members and 40 senators. So in the Assembly, they tend to run more as a herd. It tends to be more social. It tends to be more group interaction. In the Senate, it tends to be, they tend to be more experienced. Most people in the Senate come from the Assembly. Used to be more so than it is now. It used to be you could serve 6 years in the Assembly and 8 years in the Senate. And they changed it to where you could serve 12 years in either house, I think about eight or 9 years ago. So that's sort of changed, and that many of the people haven't then gone to the Senate. Like Bob Pacheco termed after 6 years. He could have run for Senate at that time, but Bob Margette was still in, and it would have been tough for him to dismount, to move him out. So, he just went back to his law practice. but for a lot of people, it was a natural progression from the Assembly to the Senate. Also, they treat staff differently. In the Assembly, you're given a budget. Out of that, you pay for, if you want to pay one person a lot of money and then starve two others, or just have one employee can do that. In the Senate, they give you slots. So it's more like a school situation where you have a step and column. And if I have somebody that's a ledge assistant, then they're going to make between 40 and 70,000. I'm just pulling these numbers out of my hat because I don't know what they actually are, as opposed to a budget you have to manage. So my slots, that compartmentalizes people. So it tends to pay better for the average staffer in the Senate, and there's more stability because the terms are longer. In the Assembly, there's a higher turnover of staff because they're just 2-year terms, and you're never quite sure whether your member is going to, get reelected. But those are some of the basic differences. And I've forgotten what the original question was because I've been blathering on. What was it again? Something about the differences between the Assembly
Yeah,
and Senate.
how it was learning the layout of the
Oh
assembly.
yeah, learning the layout. So I found it similar with city council, because when you look at a city council, I got a cat acting out over here and I'm gonna have to clobber it here real soon. But when you look at your city council, you have perceptions of what they're doing, or the state assembly or state senate. When you're actually sitting in the seat and you have to make those decisions yourself and be responsible for the things that city council members or assembly members or senators have to be responsible for, then you look at things differently and sometimes you act differently. So it was a couple of year learning curve in both the assembly and city council. I would say the Senate was similar enough that I pretty much hit the ground running on that one. But it's, one of the things that happens, and you'll hear this common from when somebody goes from local government up to Sacramento, the friends that they leave behind say, yeah, they forgot their roots, because all of a sudden they start doing this legislation that punishes local governments. I'm checking out my cat. But the answer really is, it's which hat you're wearing. When you're in local government, you're looking after local government. When you're at the state, you're looking after the state. I always tried to keep everything in mind, and I was known as a friend of local government because I didn't forget my roots, but I tried to find that sweet spot again of agreement between, where we're not running roughshod. One of the battles that I got involved in was redevelopment. You probably don't know what redevelopment agencies are. And a lot of cities had them, some didn't. They originally came in after World War II to help renovate blighted areas. And it was a way of basically keeping some of the property taxes local for a period of time to help renovate. You could give incentives to private businesses to help upgrade their facilities. There were a lot of abuses over the years, but there was also legislation that changed that. Well, Governor Jerry Brown gets in, and he just wanted to do away with them. So myself and Senator Rod Wright on the Democrat side of the aisle teamed up, and we were pretty much the only ones standing up against this. And it wasn't that redevelopment was perfect. It has eminent domain, which got a lot of enemies from the Republican side because they think eminent domain is horrible. But I defy you to build a road or without using eminent domain. I mean, if you're going to go someplace, you can't be jogging around and everything. But there are ways to do it and not. In Diamond Bar, we had a redevelopment agency, but we took eminent domain out. Turned out our project area was somebody didn't like it, one of the council members actually, and challenged it in court, and we lost that. So Walnut, on the other hand, had a very robust redevelopment agency. And actually what they did was considered an abuse, and that hole was shut in about 1993. But they basically took all the undeveloped land in Walnut and put it within the redevelopment agency, so that whenever something was built on that and it developed what we call tax increment, there was a percentage that went to the redevelopment agency. And with that money, they built your youth center, the city hall, the library. They've done a lot of roads. They did a lot of good things with that money, which is good for locals. Now, the state would argue it was bad for them because they didn't get that money, and the county didn't get the money for like 30 years is how long it stays local. But it's just a philosophical argument. And there's so many tools that the state has that local government doesn't have. I wanted to be a friend for local government in that regard. So anyway, long answer, good question.
No, thank you. We really appreciate it. So now we're going to move on to the third topic by Nicholas. which will be the modern day politics in the state of California.
Mhm.
Just a question I wanted to ask before we moved on is it's a little off topic, but it's about your bipartisan leadership. I know there's a couple people like Young Kim who rule in a bipartisan manner. But what do you think is the main importance of ruling or of leading as a bipartisan? Uh, it doesn't matter like what kind of if you're a Democrat or Republican. What's the importance?
Well, um, I've said this many times. My best training for being an elected official was being in church leadership. Well, first of all, being the youngest of 6 kids, and then also in church leadership, because in a church, you can't fire somebody. They're all volunteers. And if you irritate them, they stop giving money, they stop volunteering. So you basically have to be a cheerleader in coaxing them and working with them and encouraging them and building collaboration. And so when you build collaboration, you get a better product, I think. Not everybody gets everything they want, but you get that area of agreement that you have more people that are going to come along in the process. So that's why I put a prize on working across the aisle. I know one guy I ran against one time, we were in a debate, and he says, the only time I'm going to reach across the aisle is to slap a Democrat. And it was a good laugh line, but the reality is if that's all you're doing, you're wasting your time. You're not going to get a whole lot done at any level.
Thank you, Mr. Huff. So previously you had mentioned that you were a strong advocate for school choice, and you said that we actually enjoy the benefits of that at Walnut High School and in the Walnut Valley Unified School District. So I wanted to ask you about the work you did in the Senate and the Assembly as well, in terms of supporting school choice or district choice, and how has this benefited students around the district?
So first of all, the whole district of choice program was born out of the voucher movement. There was a push back in the 80s and 90s, early 90s to create school vouchers where the taxes you paid into the public school system, you could take your little chit and either use it at the public school system or private schools. Well, that petrified the public school system as it was founded. And so a Democrat, and I can't remember the name of the guy, but actually carried the legislations, I remember back in 1992 or 93, to create the District of Choice program in California. When I came along, I think it was my first year in the assembly, the then superintendent of Walnut Unified came to me and said, hey, we got the problem. We got this program that's about to expire. We need you to carry legislation. Well, it was too late. It was going to expire before I even got the legislation, but I did carry that, got it extended, and then did it again in, I believe it was 2009 or 10 for the second time. And that time I teamed up with Gloria Romero. She was chair of, I was in the Senate by that time. She was chair of Senate Education. I was vice chair. And we did a lot of things together in a bipartisan manner. And then, of course, she still hammered me on her partisan issues, but I tried to work with her as much as we could. And I pulled her along on District of Choice because in general, cat, hey, get out from there. Sorry, I won't speak to you that way. It's just the rogue cat getting up on the counter. Where was I? Oh, so District of Choice, I believe, brings out the best in a system that is ripe for, what's the right term? Lackadaisical efforts and outcomes. If you look at the school systems that do really well, they generally have pretty good students. They got good parental involvement, and they got all of those things, and that tends to attract better parents. But there's in better parents that value education, and so the other side of the coin, they see that, well, when a kid has an opportunity to transfer out of that to a higher performing school, they're leaving us behind, and we're left teaching a lower echelon of student. If you can understand what I'm saying. So that is the pushback we get. The original language said that it couldn't upset the ethnicity or the ethnic balance of the school, and that went back to the civil rights movement of the mid 60s. There's some protections in there, but then when was it? The affirmative action I can't remember, it's Prop 209, or I get confused all my numbers over the years. But anyway, it said you couldn't use race or as a determinant for jobs or education, and that basically constitutionally then denied that portion of the district of choice legislation. But with the choice, you're creating sort of a market economy. You're creating a group of education shoppers. If they want a better education for their kid with the tax dollar that they're paying in already, as one of my staff said, if you can go there, if you can get there, you can go there. And it was an innovative, I think, way to keep excellence in public schools. And I know Walnut Unified has said they like to consider themselves a public school that runs like a private school. They say it more artfully, but you know, they do have that, not just reputation, but the excellence to demonstrate that. And we've seen that across the state, where school choice, and there's many different facets of school choice, but that's the one that impacts you guys the most, because I remember calling the superintendent a few superintendents ago, where as an assembly member, I just carried this legislation extending district of choice, and I got a call from one of our parents saying they had applied to have their student transferred to a different district, and Walnut Unified said no. So I called the superintendent and I said, now what I'm about to tell you is you're going to see the irony, because this whole district of choice is built upon the district where the student lives can't say no. And yet Walnut on the one hand is saying, yeah, we want district of choice, but no, we're still not going to let you go to another school. So anyway, they reversed that decision and let them go out. Other superintendents that I talked to over the years have said, if I've got a student that or parents that want to go to another school, I want them to go, because if they stick around, they're going to be a pain in the neck. And there's a lot of things you can say about it, but school choice is one of those things that helps make it a little bit more excellent than what a normally run government employee school would be. That's a little bit of a mouthful. If you have any more questions, happy to answer on that.
Yes, well, I guess I was just a little curious. You mentioned that you talked to a lot of the past superintendents about having students be able to go to the school choice districts.
Mhm.
So did you ever feel that the school board was kind of like helped out with this, promoting the district choice and school choice, or was it more like of an obstacle? Because you only mentioned working with the superintendent mostly.
Well, I didn't understand the question fully, but let me just say the superintendent is the one that actually gets things done. The school board sets the policy, and then the superintendent implements the policy. And so I had good relationships with all the school board members as well. And, you know, we worked all in tandem, but it was primarily the school superintendent that I worked with to implement things on a daily basis. So what was the rest of your question? Because I missed that.
Did you witness that the school board was often really willing to pass or come up with different types of things to vote on in terms of district choice and school choice? So they really worked well with you when you were in the assembly and the Senate?
Yeah, they embrace the policy really well. And one of the things about the district of choice program, which a lot of districts would not opt in, was that whoever, as long as you have room for X number of students, and you have to declare that, if a student applies to another district, you have to take them, unless you reach your cap, and then you do a lottery to, you know, make sure that you stick within the cap of how many slots you have. But it's, yeah, well, I don't know. Anyway, yeah, the school board was always very supportive. Oh, yeah,
Last,
I remember my thought. Hold on.
okay, okay.
So, because some school districts didn't want, let's say, special needs kids, because they're very expensive to educate. And if you have a bazillion special needs kids that apply in district of choice, you got to pay for that. And the regular budget doesn't cut it. So it's a risk. Walnut Unified has done an excellent job of meeting needs of everybody that's applied. And in fact, one of the school districts, who should remain nameless, was rumored heavily, and I heard it from several sources, to be saying, well, you know, we just don't have the resources here to take care of you. You should really apply to Walnut Unified. They'll take care of you. And so that's the flip side, because it's of the school district is always saying that Walnut was poaching their best students and leaving them with the, so they were trying to encourage their higher expensive students to go to Walnut Unified. Okay, sorry. Okay, Nicholas, you're
No,
on.
no problem. Thank you for answering that. So I like to talk about Proposition 16, which luckily failed, but it was on the ballot last November, and you were a really strong advocate against it. Actually, I attended one of the rallies that you had with Chairwoman Patterson
Mhm.
a few months ago. So could you tell us a little bit about this and why it would just be so detrimental to our communities here?
Well, again, Prop 16 would reintroduce affirmative action. And in doing that, not just for school admissions, but for jobs, we focus mostly on the school, and rightfully so. It would have, again, set back the district of choice program, but more importantly, when you get into college, you could have somebody that has scrimped and saved and their family has gone through everything to make it possible for the kid to get to the best schools. And the kids worked hard, and then they're held bound while they raise somebody else who somebody has decided has more merit than the other. And it's just when you have decision makers at the admissions level of colleges playing God about who's more important or who's more desired, that should be a problem for all of us to ponder. And Prop 16 would absolutely insert humans into a situation where I believe the UC system is already, engaged in some of that, and it just hasn't been challenged legally yet. I've heard that from a couple of their professors. I certainly believe that, but nevertheless, most people believe that we need to make decisions in a race neutral manner. And so that was upheld. I think that's the best decision, because if you can't base a decision on merit, if you're constantly, lifting up this and pushing down this, then, the sides lifting up may never grow the muscles they need, and the side being pushed down may give up. It's just not a good thing in our society to be doing that.
Yes, thank you for answering that. I know it's a very important topic to you, and also because while doing my research, I noticed that Huff Strategies works a lot with the Asian communities, especially the Chinese community, and there are some of the people that are really negatively affected by this affirmative action. And as you mentioned, the UC systems are also negatively affecting them in this way.
Correct.
Mhm. Well, thank you so much for answering my questions.
Mhm.
If some of the other people would like to ask some questions, such as Ashton or Angela or Mark or Saeed.
Hello, Mr. Popov. I just wanted to know, I just want to know if you could please tell me more about the relationship between the state governments and city governments.
Often adversarial. The cities are really squeezed right now, and they have limited abilities to raise taxes. I guess everybody has the ability to go pass a tax, but at the end of the day, public pensions are really driving all levels of government into hard economic times. And the state dealt with that by a couple of taxes, and Governor Brown back in 2012, I think it was, maybe in 14, but extended the so-called temporary tax and made it a permanent tax. There's been others. So the state doesn't really have a revenue issue right now, but at the local level, all these promises they've made on pensions are catching up with them. So no matter what else they're doing, their pension burden is heavy. Now, Walnut and Diamond Bar both have, they contract for sheriff and fire with the county. And so they're not as impacted as badly. But as those costs go up for the county sheriff, when these cities renegotiate their contracts, it costs them more money. So cities are just, right now, they're having a big tension on paying for public safety and working with the state in ways to get that done. There's always a push and pull, and it basically is territorial. They should be working collaboratively. Most of the time they are, sometimes they're not.
How much of your time do you dedicate to your occupation? Like, how many hours a week do you have to work?
Wow. Well, let me go to city council. I was busy. I had two kids at the time and was busy, just busy. Uh, when I was asked if I wanted to serve on the General Plan Advisory Committee, I told the guy, asked me, I haven't got time to do that. Well, I made time. It wasn't going to take a lot of time. The mayor called me and prevailed upon me. And I found setting aside a 2 or 3 hour meeting once a month wasn't too difficult, but then it became twice a month, then it was once a week, then it was twice a week until we got it done. But it kind of sets the stage of becoming a priority. So you start to crowd family out and business out. And by crowd them, I mean, it's urgent, right? You got it done. You got a schedule, you got obligations to meet. So at the assembly level, it's just assumed you're working all the time in the Senate. And it actually made it easier traveling to Sacramento Monday through Thursday and then being home on the weekend, because Monday through Thursday, you can focus just on the job. And then on the weekend, you get to squeeze the family in, but that's when your constituents get to see you. So it's really a 24-hour, 7-day-a-week job. And if you're going to get something done, you basically have to plan it months in advance and put it on your calendar and put asterisks around it and tell your staff this will not be violated. And of course, 1 out of 3 times it is violated, because you can't look into time and figure out what else is going to be happening at the same time. So I was pretty busy just doing all of that stuff. When I became leader, anytime I had on my weekends was gone then too, which I didn't realize, because up there in Sacramento, I now had 3 schedulers. I had my scheduler up in my main scheduler who took care of meeting with constituents in the Capitol or with lobbyists or other members. And then I had a scheduler in the district that took care of the weekend schedule. And then I had a political scheduler, because when you're leader, you're taking care of the whole political operation. And I would have to raise several $1,000,000. Well, more than several $1,000,000. We had to get to about 12, $13 million, and I was raising most of that. Some of it was raised as a team with other members, where we do joint calls and split the proceeds with the assembly and the state party. But nevertheless, I had a scheduler just working on that. So I have 3 friggin' schedulers, and unless I'm smart enough to put something on the calendar 4 months in advance, my time is all gone. So that was a real challenge. But it's you know you attend Walnut High, right? You don't have any free time. It's the same thing. Every hour is taken, every minute is taken, it's scheduled out for you.
So like how can we as like members of community organizations like actually work with legislators in order to make an impact on our community?
Yeah, okay. So first of all, you reach out and establish contact with him, like you've done with Phil Chen, and develop a relationship with him. If you have a dialogue, then and he knows who you are, he's more likely to answer when you have a specific need. But everything in politics is about relationships. And a lot is said about donors and all that. They like to think that our affection and our time is bought. I had one legislator explain to me one time that he said, well, why wouldn't we pay attention to people that are writing checks to us, because they're the ones that keep us elected? Well, that's kind of a crass way to look at it. But the reality is, when you're in a capable position to write donations to a legislator, it does register at some level. First few years, I didn't even know who was giving me money. And when I would say that, my staff would be embarrassed, because they're supposed to be telling me who's writing checks. But I truly was making decisions based on what I thought was right instead of who the donors were. But I never gave up the thing about doing what is right. It's just that you balance in that if you get a $10,000 donor, you at least got to answer the call. So you do whatever you can to create a relationship with an elected official and keep that as fresh as you can. Send them birthday cards or reminders, Christmas, things that don't cost you a lot of money, but just stay on top of it. And then when you have real need, you'll be able to engage with them. But relationship is what it's all about. It's a good question. People just don't know how to engage. There's these strange people that disappear for most of the week, but they're interested in you. In that you guys are young, you don't have to give money. They like to feel they have the ear of the youth, And so you give them something that is more valuable than money.
Thank you so much for answering that. Well, I think that concludes all of the questions that we're going to be asking in this dialogue. So we'd just like to thank you, Mr. Huff, so much for joining us today and for speaking to our organization. We really appreciate it.
Well, before I disappear, and I appreciate the opportunity to talk with you, if I was in Sacramento and you were coming to visit me when I was leader, this backdrop is where you would have visited me. It's a pretty cool office in the old part of the Capitol. They're in the process of designing and building a new office space for the members up there. But in the old building, historic building, built in the 1870s, I was the only Republican with an office there, and then the Democrats had basically 4 offices there. So it was quite an honor. Everything is historic, and everything is a period piece of 1900 or before. My desk was made by criminals because they had some pretty good craftsmen back then, and it was used by a Secretary of State in 1900, and then somewhere along the line it came in the leader's office. But if you have an opportunity to visit up there, you really should visit with your assembly member, your senator. They'll usually make time for. I always made time for when I had, visitors from down south, and you will remember it. I first visited Sacramento when I was in high school at Boys State, and visited with my assembly member Victor V. Vesey, who was from a neighboring town down in Imperial Valley. He went on to be a congressman. He's still seen as a big hero. I hit a Senate Republican leader, and they don't even know who I am. So it's okay. That's not true. Imperial Valley College, honored me with some recognition because I went to Imperial Valley College for a year. Anyway, it's a pleasure meeting with you all. Thank you, Nicholas, for setting it up.
Thank you so much, Mr. Huff.
Thank you.
Bye,
Thank
guys.
you. It was a pleasure speaking with you.
Likewise.